yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
Welcome. The show is in honor of the show for veterans. It's about veterans, and we try and bring all the information that we can to you. My co-host Paul Dietrich is here with us as always, and thank you, Paul, because
no problem.
Paul calls everybody and gets them to come on the show and talk about important things. Speaking of which, our guest is Cody, Captain Art Cody, U.S. Navy retired, 34 years, served at West Point, went to? Army, that was Army and then Navy?
Correct,
okay.
Correct.
And Art is here with us from the New York State Defenders Program.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The New York State Defenders Association,
right.
The Veterans Defense Program.
Okay, very good. Thank you for straightening me out with that. Give us a little idea. What is that program about?
Sure. What our program does primarily, our mission is to support veterans in the criminal justice and the family court systems in the state of New York. Primarily, we do this through two different ways. One is to help defense lawyers understand the veteran experience and help them understand what they need to do and what the proper way to defend a veteran. Part of the New York State Defenders Association's overall mission is to raise the level of defense in the state of New York. And what we do as part of that in veterans defense is to raise the level of defense for veterans. So our first mission really is to teach public defenders, to teach assigned counsel or private counsel, hey, how do you represent a veteran? What are the forms you need? What are the documents you should be getting? What kind of questions should you ask your veteran about their veteran experience? And who do you need to reach out to in their chain of command to understand what they went through? Secondly, we get directly involved in cases, and we'll talk to veterans in jails across the state. Certainly, I've done some work in Richmond County, as well as Suffolk, Nassau, up the Hudson Valley. And what we try to do is, at core, what we're trying to do is take that veteran's experience and make that veteran more than just a defendant in court. For example, I don't want the judge or the prosecutor thinking about this veteran as, oh, this is the burglary too, or this is the criminal possession of a weapon guy. I want that prosecutor and that judge to understand that this is a 3-time Afghanistan veteran or 2-time Iraq War veteran, and understand what that veteran went through. And a lot of times, what they went through in Afghanistan or Iraq it affected them, and really that's what has brought them into the criminal justice system.
Right. We were talking in the green room or the kitchen, whichever you want to call it, earlier, and you mentioned you talked with some of the judges, and you told them not to think of the person as a burglary tool,
right.
Okay,
right.
But to think of him as a person who'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan,
correct,
or 3 tours in Iraq, and that impact alone on the individual is you don't come out of there a normal person.
Well, there's an old expression in war: there are no unwounded soldiers.
Right.
No one comes back from an Afghan deployment or an Iraqi deployment exactly the same way they went over, and some experiences certainly are more intense than others. Having said that, going to war, and our soldiers now are looking at 9, 12, 18 months in the combat theater. You don't come back exactly the same. And I think one of the most important parts about that, particularly for reservists and guardsmen, is when they come back, the world at home has not stopped. So the mission they had at home, that's how a lot of times how soldiers think of themselves is, okay, what's my mission? And when I say soldiers, I mean soldiers, airmen, Marines, sailors. So like the mission they had in the United States, whether it be at their civilian job, in their family, or just socially, that may be gone. So they feel very disconnected with the civilian side, and they're also at the same time they may be processing everything that happened to them in Kandahar province or Anbar province. That's a very difficult thing for them to do.
Right.
We had talked before about how here on Staten Island we now have a Veterans Court, Richmond County here. Right. And I had mentioned before that right now there are currently 11 veterans in that court, in the program, and they've just had recently 2 graduates from it, that have gotten through the program and are back basically into the civilian world, primarily because they've gotten the treatment that they need. And I think that's an important aspect of the court. The idea is to link them up with the treatment that they need, so that they can at least put the issues that they've had behind them and move on back into the civilian world successfully and not end up in prison or whatever. But we had talked about how here on Staten Island you had even spoken with the defenders here on Staten Island.
Correct. I've been fortunate enough to work with legal aid here on a number of levels, certainly in providing them classes on military culture, because as you all well know, and I think a lot of our veteran audience will know, only 7% of the U.S. population are veterans. Yep. So it's sometimes, and to be in the military, particularly to be in the combat environment, is a very different kind of experience. It's very foreign to people. Yes. For example, when we drive on the highway here, we're not really worried about IEDs, no. and you're not looking at the rooftops for snipers. But for your combat soldier, that's every day, and it's tough to get that mindset out. So a lot of what we try to do, and this goes to the Veteran Treatment Court, is we're trying to change, as I talked about before, we're trying to change the narrative from this isn't a case about a burglary, this is a case about a 3-time Afghan vet. And in most of our cases, the vast majority of our cases, our veterans will have no criminal record prior to entering to the service. So, but their experience, either in Iraq, as it was for you, or Afghanistan for me, that it changes them. Yeah. So when they come back, they are different. So one of the things we're trying to do is to get them into the treatment to, as we would say, to bring them all the way home.
Yeah. I can relate to that experience with the driving. When I came home on leave, after having been 6 months basically in Iraq, we drove down to visit my daughter in Virginia, and first off, I kept reaching for my pistol because where did I leave my pistol?
Right.
But the second part of it was just driving down the road. I just felt totally naked because there were no concrete walls on either side of me. And if anybody has been in Iraq or Afghanistan, almost every road has these concrete walls to prevent shrapnel or IEDs or people getting close to the road where they can emplace them. So it was just like, I just felt totally out of it, and it's like, wow.
And it's an uncomfortable experience.
It's extremely uncomfortable, and my wife keeps saying, well, what's wrong? I said, it's very difficult to explain to a civilian that, 6 months you've been driving on roads where you could have been shot at or bombed or IED'd at any moment, and now all of a sudden you're not. But that experience doesn't go away. That feeling doesn't go away. And it's reality. It's your new reality. That's what you expect. To this day, I still feel uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And remember now that we're talking almost 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I think and we see it in our veteran clients as well. The intensity of the experience.
Yes.
It takes a great amount of time, and sometimes the answer is never.
It
never completely leaves.
Yes.
But when we talk about treatment, we can't necessarily cure our veterans of post-traumatic stress disorder. But because really post-traumatic stress, we sometimes say it's a disorder, but in reality, it's a normal reaction to a very abnormal experience.
Yes.
So what we try to do is if we can get this veteran into treatment, then we can give that veteran skills that that veteran needs to use to cope with the post-traumatic stress that they're going through.
Yes, and that's what you're really trying to do, is to give them the skills so that they can continue to cope in the civilian world.
Correct.
Whereas before, they were trying to survive. And basically, that's what you're talking about. It's survival, and now you're back in the civilian world.
And some of those skills don't translate that well.
No.
I mean, when you were mentioning having the weapon with you and tapping for the weapon, we've had a variety of different cases where our veterans who are absolutely used to having a weapon, in fact, they're required to have a weapon, and literally what they're required...
24 hours a day.
Exactly. What you're required to do, and the veteran I think of actually came home, he was in Queens, and he got arrested on a weapons charge. So one of the things I was able to tell to the prosecutor is literally this veteran in July was required to have a loaded weapon, and now that very same thing, only 3 months later...
Gets him in trouble.
Gets him a mandatory 3.5 years.
Yes.
And so what we're trying to say is, this is a person. It's not a bad person. Okay, you just have to understand that he's still reintegrating back into the States.
Yes, and it takes a tremendous amount of time. There are still times now, 10 years later, where it's just
second nature.
Especially for basically for 2 years, I carried a weapon everywhere. I carried a weapon to the shower.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't take it in there, but I did carry it to the shower. That's how intense the situation is. The same thing, loud noises. Yeah. Loud noises.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm sorry, I may still drop.
Right. It's an instinctive reaction.
Yes. You don't even think about it.
The sad thing is that the post-traumatic stress was not really identified until recent vintage. I mean, if you went back to, my father was World War II. He suffered from post-traumatic stress. I didn't know that's what it was back then, but he suffered from it because I could relate to things that he did over the years growing up that were so military instilled in his way of life. Okay, the guys that came home from Korea, the guys that came home from Vietnam, I often tell the story. The sad part about being a police officer for 27 years is, in the beginning especially, was running into cases where the police were involved, and the subject was a Vietnam vet.
Right.
Okay.
Very common.
And nobody said post-traumatic stress in those days. There was a part of me inside that felt that, hey, this guy needs a break, because he came from hell. Right. He left.
But the hell's still with him.
Yes, hell's still with him. You're right. Yeah. So.
And actually, one of the reasons that the Veterans Defense Program was set up is the New York State Defenders Association has been around since 1967, and one of the things that we encountered, not me personally, I'm not quite that old, but one of the things we encountered back in '67 was the same thing you're talking about, and there really wasn't a program set up to assist these Vietnam vets, so you might get a well-meaning, trying to do the right thing public defender would say to his client, well, wear your uniform to court, maybe you'll get a break. Yeah. And we want to go well beyond that, and what we're really looking for is not what I think of as the Home Depot discount, the 10% discount. I was going to give you 10 years, now I'll give you 9. That's not what we want. What I really want, and I think what the Veterans Defense Program wants, is we want the disposition of the crime to be different, not in terms of length, but in character. For example, what this veteran needs is not 3 years in prison. What this veteran needs is probably 6 months of treatment to help him come home. Right. And we say him because most of our clients are males. To help this veteran come all the way home and be able to cope, to adapt, to be able to adjust to the post-traumatic stress they're dealing with, as well as just reintegrate back into society.
Yes.
When you deal with the attorneys on the other side, do you deal with prosecutors as well as?
Certainly.
Okay. Do you have any difficulty in relating to the prosecutors?
Well, that's a good question. I think the prosecution, my experience, by and large, they absolutely want to do the right thing. Okay, I think that they absolutely want to do the right thing. Their view, and perhaps understandably so, and it's because sometimes some of the clients we have, their crimes are not insignificant.
Right.
So sometimes their view of what the right thing is different than what mine is as a defense counsel. But part of my job, I would say a major part of my job, is to educate, to work with the prosecutor so that the prosecutor can get a sense of, okay, this veteran, this burglar, okay, it's not just a burglar, okay, this veteran defendant, this is what happened to him in Afghanistan, and particularly if the crime involves substance abuse or drugs, we get to the root of why the crime was committed, the alleged crime was committed, and we go all the way back, and most of the time I can help to show the prosecutor, okay, this crime is really rooted in what happened at a forward operating base Shank in Afghanistan. For example, one of our clients literally, he was about maybe 50 yards away. A mortar comes in, lands. One of his best buddies loses both legs, and he's right there for that. That doesn't leave you, okay? And that led to some substance abuse later on down the road. Right. The drinking led to another crime. But we can get to not a bad kid. Okay, just what happened to him. And when we can get there, I think most of the times the prosecutors will work with us. And really that's what I really consider success, is when we can literally team with the prosecutor, and so the prosecutor understands, and we can seek the best disposition for the client.
And I think that was important. We were talking before about here on Staten Island, and just recently the district attorney brought the mentors in, the veteran mentors, of which I'm one, in. And in the same room, we had the public defenders, and we had the assistant district attorneys who do the prosecuting. We were all in the room together, and the direction was very plain. The direction was that we wanted to get more veterans if we had, not going to prison, but to going to the treatment that they need in order to reintegrate into society. And I think that's a very worthwhile goal. And obviously there's a lot of work that needs to be done yet, but it's a start.
Absolutely, it's a start. And we consider, if we can get a veteran out of what it sometimes is considered the mainstream criminal justice system, which includes prison and those kind of sanctions, if I can get that veteran to Veterans Treatment Court, then that's a win, because I'm going to get that vet treatment. And I think in many cases, I'm not quite sure how it's done in Staten Island, but in many cases, the entrance into Veterans Treatment Court actually, this is pretty much in all cases. Entrance into Veterans Treatment Court is on a case-by-case basis, driven by the district attorney. Yep. So, and what I was going to say varies is what criteria they use to get whether a veteran gets in and doesn't get in. Does it depend on how many prior offenses they have? Does it depend upon the level of the crime? But one of the things we try to do is, given that it's on a case-by-case basis, is show why a particular veteran is a good candidate for Veterans Treatment Court. Yes. And unfortunately, but I think it's just the nature of what our veterans have been through. Most of the time, their offenses they're not insider trading. Okay, they're not white collar, what we would think is financial kind of crimes. My boss Gary Horton out in Batavia would say that usually it's not for writing bad checks. No. Okay, because you have to remember who your soldiers are and what they're used, the physicality involved in being a veteran. Yes. So a lot of times it will be an assault, particularly an infantry veteran. Exactly. That is their existence. Breaking down doors is what you train them to do. What sometimes we say, their training syllabus normally does not include peaceful conflict resolution. No, that's not how they're trained. But we have to remember, we've trained them to do that. Yes, and you can't untrain them that quickly. Okay, certainly not instantly. No. So one of the things we try to, hopefully, in working with the prosecution, is if things are on a case-by-case basis, to understand, okay, it is an assault case. We have that. We have an assault case. But this is the underlying circumstances of that assault case. Yes.
The other thing that we discussed, again, during that meeting with the DA here on Staten Island was the difficulty in even getting some of the veterans to acknowledge that they're a veteran.
Oh, yeah.
And I think part of it is somewhat there's an embarrassment there that I've gone off the path. Some of it, I don't think that they particularly consider that they're veterans, and there are many reasons for that. I mean, we've discussed previously on the show that particularly with female veterans, they do not seem to identify as a group as being veterans in a lot of cases. And I think also it's somewhat the reserves and the National Guards, and to be perfectly honest, you basically sucked every reservist and National Guardsman out of their services and sent them overseas in the past, while this war has gone on. People that never thought they were going to be mobilized. I remember speaking to one of my groups and telling them that, you know, you guys are gals are being mobilized, and it was like, well, that's not what I signed up for. I signed up for college. I said, well, you may have signed up for college, but that's being put on hold, or you can take your books with you. But the fact of the matter is,
you're going.
Adios.
Yeah.
That reality is out there, that those people really, in a lot of cases, don't even consider themselves veterans, or don't think that that should do anything for them. It's all of these things, I think.
I think it comes about because when you're in the military, and I'd be interested in your guys' take on it, but when you're in the military, veteran's a hollowed term.
Yes.
Because this person is a veteran, we look up to them because they have walked the walk.
Yes.
So there's almost a perception in the military, I am not worthy of that title. And I do see, as most of my time was as a reservist, that unless you had been mobilized and went to an Iraq or an Afghanistan, you were not a veteran. And even in some cases, if you did, but you weren't directly involved in kinetics, what we kind of euphemistically call kinetics, a gun battle, well, I'm not a veteran. Okay. Or what we see a significant amount of is veterans who have done all these things, but for whatever reason, they have been other than honorable discharge. In our view, in the Veterans Defense Program's view, if I suppose the standard, the way I like to ask it, have you ever worn a uniform that has the initials U.S. and some branch of government after that?
Yes.
I draw the line with the post office, but having said that, although they work hard too, but having said that, there is, I think, a belief among veterans, particularly, I think the other thing you touched on was, you said embarrassed. Sometimes I think I've disgraced. I've disgraced the Army by doing, or the whatever service I was in, by doing whatever I'm accused of. Okay. But I think what we try to do is, hey, you have served your country. Okay? Yes. You have served your country, and this is part of what your country, or at least what your state, owes you, and we're going to help you.
I agree. The other item that came up during this actual meeting was they were talking about changing whatever the form is that was the arrest record, and they wanted to get placed on there, are you a veteran? And I said, wrong thing to place on there. I said, have you served? I think that was the important words to add rather than are you a veteran? Because as we've just described, there's a number of people that are veterans who don't really, who may not, for whatever reason, consider themselves a veteran in the situation they're in right now or in their life.
And there were times when a veteran didn't want to be considered a veteran based on public image.
Yes, that's the other.
I refer specifically, I guess, to Vietnam vets.
Yes.
Correct.
They came back, I mean, we were evil. We were evil.
Fortunately, it's a lot better now.
Thank God, it's a lot better now. But I remember coming back, that was a horror show.
You wouldn't wear your uniform in public
Absolutely
at that
not.
point.
Absolutely not.
Because somebody might spit on you.
And people often say to me, why aren't you a member of the VA? Because I didn't want to join. I was a member of the police department. I had all the health coverage, and and I took care of my college and on my own and everything.
And I think part of the problem is when we ask whether a person's a veteran or not, if they've been told by the Veterans Administration that they are not considered by the Veterans Administration to be a veteran because they either have an other than honorable discharge or dishonorable discharge or any of those, bad papers, so to speak. Well, gosh, my own government has told me I'm not a veteran.
Right.
But we certainly don't look at it that way. literally anyone who's worn the uniform for a day, we consider a veteran, and certainly some veteran experiences are significantly more intense than others, but our criteria for veterans literally is based upon your military service. Is there a way that we can either help you in court or we can get you the treatment you need?
And I think the important thing for the veteran to realize is, in my opinion, the public defenders program isn't here to help you get out of trouble. It's here to help you get help
treatment.
Yes.
For whatever problem that got you into trouble.
Sometimes we think of it as therapeutic justice.
Exactly. Right. A very, very good term. Very good term.
Well, out here we have quite a wide veteran audience and even families of veterans. And we've said this before, if you're a veteran out there or a family of a veteran and you need help, here is another asset that's available to you. And at this point, I'd ask if you would be willing to give your contact information out.
Sure. Our main office is in Batavia, New York, and the phone number there is 585-219-4862. 585-219-4862. And if you contact them and you are in Staten Island, you will very likely end up with me on your doorstep. And we get a great many calls from either the veteran themselves, potentially the lawyer. Many times the family members will call us. And one thing I should add, we are state funded, so we are absolutely free to the veteran, to the lawyer, to whoever. We literally, we don't accept a dime. We are there to help the veteran. And the staff of the Veterans Defense Program, all of them are either veterans or have been involved in veterans justice for decades. So we all, to kind of use the military term, we all have the fire in the belly to try to help veterans. We are very dedicated to it, and I mean literally, you can call us pretty much 24/7, and we'll do whatever we can to help veterans. And we've handled cases literally from, not to minimize DWI, but from drunk driving cases all the way up to homicides.
Yes.
Right. And should we mention that Art Cody is the deputy director of this program? It's and you're to be commended for that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that you put both feet forward and to help veterans, it's very, very important thing, and a thing where it doesn't impact the finances of the veteran when he's in trouble, because God knows, even a DWI case, if you go with...
That's a good point, because I think that a DWI case, it can be life-changing.
Yes.
Right.
And the outcome of DWI case, and we've had several cases, in fact I'm working on a case now, where the veteran has a DWI, and not only how does it affect them in the civilian world, but if the person is actually still in, because we'll do active duty military cases.
Still in, he's probably going to be out.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. So what we're trying to do is, hey, can we change the disposition of this to make it more likely that this soldier will be able to stay in the military? So that's
brings us pretty much to the close, but I tell you that number one, I'm very, very grateful for you coming and doing the program with us. I'm very grateful for Paul contacted you and bring him in. And I want to commend Paul and Terry Converse, one of our staff members, for being mentors here on Staten Island to help this program work.
The Veteran Treatment Program, really the backbone of that. And Judge Russell in Buffalo, who started the Veteran Treatment Program, Treatment Court Program, mentioned the secret sauce is the mentors, because the mentors can help those veterans come along.
Wow. You've been listening to Art Cody, a captain, U.S. Navy, retired, and the deputy director of the New York State Defenders Association.
Veterans Defense Program.
The Veterans Defense Program. And I want to thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much.
Great program.
Thanks for having me.
Paul, thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Pleasure. Thank you.
You just keep watching in honor of. It's our pleasure to bring you programs like this, and we promise you to keep informing you as to things that will help the veteran's life. Thank you, and God bless.